Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I will be discussing what every candidate needs in the first 4 states to win the 2020 Democratic primary, by taking a look at the first 4 elections and caucuses in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, and what each candidate needs to achieve to put them on the pathway to the nomination. So, without further ado, let's jump right in with the lowest polling candidates. Michael Bloomberg, Tulsi Gabbard, and Tom Steyer. These 3 can be lumped together as they need to place in at least 2 states. Not win, just place. You need 15% in any election to gain delegates, and all of them are lacking in the ground game and general support required to place. These campaigns are on life support because the first 4 states function as a killing ground for the low popularity candidates. Because if you can't place, your fair weather supporters will turn elsewhere. However, this could be turned to their advantage. An ability to place can be seen as a sign to those leaving other campaigns that yours could be ascendant and a good horse to bet on, or at least worth looking into. Should any of these candidates succeed in doing this, they won't be guaranteed the nomination. Rather, they will gain a second chance to make up the lost ground on Super Tuesday. A tiny window of opportunity, but an opportunity nonetheless. On to Williamson, Patrick, Bennett, and Delaney. Yeah, they're still in the race. Actually, Williamson just dropped out, but it's a tad difficult to change these graphics when they're all lumped together like this. Anywho, these guys have the same issues as the previous 3, except they have an even bigger problem. They lack name recognition. Name recognition can save you significantly when you are lower in the polls, as it can allow you to pick up some very last-minute voters, as they select a name they recognize and have positive or even neutral feelings towards. These candidates don't have any of that, and as such they need to place in all 4 states in order to gain the name recognition they need in order to enter the Steyer, Gabbard, Bloomberg cohort. From there they will have an even greater fight ahead of them, a make-or-break Super Tuesday. Andrew Yang. Mr. Yang is a unique candidate, as he seems to be a single-issue candidate who has an actual shot of winning the nomination. That is, if he can turn his online following into actual votes. Yang has a strong online presence, but that has yet to materialize in the polling. Hence, his goal is to prove that he can actually place. So he has to do 2 things. First, he needs to place in all 4 states, naturally. On top of that, he needs to come in first in one of these, or second in 2. This will show him as a rising star and potential frontrunner. Right now, many view him as a novelty candidate. The guy who answers every question with the phrase, "Give them $1,000 a month." I wonder how much cake they'll let them eat. Anywho, he needs to prove that he can not only place, but win in Super Tuesday. Amy Klobuchar. Senator Klobuchar has been a surprisingly long-standing presence in the Democratic debates, despite her polling numbers failing to separate her from the rest of the pack. This leaves her in a tough position, as she has the potential to see a spike in support at just the right moment, as opposed to her opponents, Warren and Budaj, both who seem to have peaked too soon. However, she needs to start rising fast, as she will need to gain at least an additional 10% in the national polling for many to see her as viable and for her to place in many states. Her best shot is by taking down Mayor Pete early on, then slowly cannibalizing her fellow moderate Joe Biden. Pete's support has been wavering, and a strong showing in Iowa by Klobuchar could cause it to collapse entirely. To achieve this, she'll need to both beat Pete and place in the top 3 candidates, setting her up to spar with the frontrunners. She'll then need to achieve a repeat victory in New Hampshire, except this time she needs to overtake Elizabeth Warren. Warren is the weakest of the frontrunners, and beating her on her home turf of New England would cause many of her more moderate supporters to turn to Klobuchar, and left-leaning ones to Sanders, allowing Amy to usurp her position in the top 3. 2 strong wins in Iowa and New Hampshire will also aid her in gaining the supporters of lower polling candidates as they drop out, as they've had a more moderate bend to them. From this point on, her goal is to end up in the top 3 in Nevada and South Carolina. To keep momentum up while focusing her resources on Super Tuesday to try and overtake Sanders and Biden and win the nomination. Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete has had an interesting primary season so far, filled with false starts, controversies, and an early peak. However, in spite of this, he's managed to hang on to roughly 8% of the national electorate. What makes this truly impressive is how he has done so with no name recognition outside his small city of South Bend, and a closet so full of skeletons it would make a necrophiliac blush. If he can pull out a win, it would be a presidential election story for the ages. And he could do it. But all roads start with a victory in Iowa. And it seems he knows it too, given the fact that his campaign has been placing the vast majority of their war chest into the Hawkeye state. This is good, because he needs to get first in Iowa. This is for a few reasons. It will help him with voters who haven't been paying attention to the primary race, as his name will begin to carry as much weight as more recognizable names, like Biden or Sanders. On the other side of the coin, a win will cause tuned-in voters to reevaluate their opinions of him, seeing him as a front-runner as opposed to the eternal fourth, setting him up to supplant Biden as the center status quo candidate against the more progressive Sanders and Warren. He must hold this support into New Hampshire as well, where he will need to get first once more or possibly second to Sanders, where home turf advantage can be argued. Coming in second to Warren, however, is out of the question, seeing how the two currently have an overlap in voters, where if there is a back and forth of them overtaking one another, the result will be a long, slogged-out campaign where voters keep switching sides depending on who's in the lead. In Nevada and South Carolina, his aim should be to place in the top 3. Manifesting a strong presence in all of the early states will translate to the national momentum required to seize the nomination, especially coming from a place of obscurity and controversy. He can easily be brushed off as a flash-in-the-pan candidate if he fails to consistently place in early states, or non-viable if he fails to triumph over the current frontrunners. It is a narrow pathway, but if he can make it, the rest of the race will be a walk in the park. Elizabeth Warren. Senator Warren is in a rough position. Having peaked in October, she is now hovering around 15% support nationally, barely enough to place in any of the primary races. As such, she needs to create a narrative of a rebound. This begins by making the top 3 in Iowa, preferably within 5% of whoever is in first. This will cement her campaign as one of the frontrunners, and make the message of the Iowa caucus that this primary is far from over. Following up with a first-place victory in New Hampshire is paramount. This state is seen as her home turf of New England, and failing to win will cause headlines as though she failed to win her own home state. Should she be victorious, she will have made herself a competitive force against both Sanders and Biden. She now needs to keep the momentum going for Super Tuesday. This means coming in first or a close second in Nevada. Proving to be highly viable in Nevada will help her win big in California, amass a Super Tuesday prize she's been polling well in. Perfect for a mid-race bump to first. Finally, she needs to overachieve in South Carolina. This state is expected to go hard to Joe Biden. The downside to this for the Warren campaign is that it means Biden will gain an influx of delegates going into Super Tuesday, most likely returning him to first place. But this foregone conclusion means that every point the margin narrows is a point against Biden, further cementing Warren as the candidate ascendant, leading into Super Tuesday. Bernie Sanders. Much like with his policy positions, Senator Sanders' place in the polling has been incredibly consistent, holding around 17 to 20% since he first announced his campaign, proving his claims of a dedicated base. So the real question for his campaign is, can he grow this support to overtake Joe Biden? Fortunately, he has an easy mechanism to do this. Caucuses. Incredibly briefly, the way caucuses work is that everyone in the local district gets together in a big meeting, where each side goes around and attempts to convert people to vote for their candidate of choice. This results in many voters arriving at the polls undecided. Hence, candidates with less support/excitement underperform, and those with more support overperform. As it stands, Sanders is the only candidate who has both high support and excitement, so his main priority is to win the Iowa caucus by as strong a majority as possible. We're talking 40 to 50% of the vote here. A clear victory. This is him making his electability argument to the moderate voting base of the Democratic Party. After all, he's not just winning the caucus, but the important swing state of Iowa. He will need to continue this trend into New Hampshire. The sister state of Vermont, losing New Hampshire will be treated like him losing his own state. Bad publicity for any candidate. Next is Nevada, another caucus. Here he should aim to repeat the events of Iowa, as 3 victories will be required to help him overcome his greatest challenge. South Carolina. A strong Biden state, a severe loss here could restart the narrative that Sanders has little support in the African American community. Thusly, his goal should be to place within the top 3 and within 10% of Joe Biden. A steep challenge for any candidate, but doing so will allow him to enter Super Tuesday as the unchallenged frontrunner. Lastly, we have Joe Biden. Vice President Biden has a totally different set of goals when compared to all of the other candidates in this primary. While they need to build momentum and support, he needs to avoid losing it. As the frontrunner since day one of the primary, the mission of the Biden camp has been to hang on to their current supporters. Because once they're gone, they probably won't be coming back. Thus, his goal isn't to win the first 4 states, rather to maintain his lead until Super Tuesday, where he can take advantage of his frontrunner status to float himself into an almost insurmountable lead. A good bellwether for his chances will be in Iowa, where his only goal is to place. Yes, just place. Right now, he's not expected to come in first, or even possibly second or third, depending on the day. This works in his favor, as low placement won't stir narratives of a collapsing campaign, his greatest fear. However, failing to place will, especially if one of his younger centrist challengers outperforms him. Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar are both gunning for his position of the moderate favorite. If they're able to place when Biden cannot, well, actually, we've already covered this, so you know what would happen. The same logic extends to both New Hampshire and Nevada, but he needs to come in first in one or second in both. Otherwise, the narrative of the deflating campaign will rear its ugly head, which could prove especially problematic as we head into his make-or-break state, South Carolina. He has polled incredibly well there, and is expecting a resounding victory, which could return him to the first place on its own should he suffer in the earlier states. But it's a double-edged sword. If he fails to place in other states, the narrative becomes, can Biden win outside of South Carolina? Or should his margin of victory noticeably shrink, or he come in any other position than first, it could very well be the beginning of the end of his campaign. Entering Super Tuesday in a weakened position could fracture his support to the other moderate candidates and cost him his frontrunner status, which, like his support, once it's gone, it's never coming back. So, what do you think the chances are for the various candidates? What pathways lie open to them? Feel free to comment down below to share your opinion. Please also leave a like to support the video. Also, if you want to see more content, remember to subscribe and click that notification bell. Otherwise, as always, have a wonderful day.